Today we're going to look at using the free ArtLink 7 software that you can download from the Bernina website. So ArtLink 7 is basic software program that allows you to open embroidery designs. You can make basic adjustments and then write those designs either directly to your embroidery unit, to your sewing machine, or to a USB key. And now we're going to have a look at some of the things you can do with the software. We're going to be using it to, we're going to be using one of the built-in embroidery designs on our makeup brush holder, and we're going to look at how we can play with that design using the software. So what can ArtLink do? So with ArtLink you can open an embroidery design. So here I can go open. Now ArtLink comes with 40 built-in designs, so it's got a nice range of designs. I'm going to scroll through, and the design I'm going to use is a little bird, a little blue bird. So it's WP099. I'm going to click on it and then I'm just going to press open and it will appear on my screen. Now some of the things that ArtLink can't do, we'll just have a quick look at those. So with ArtLink you can't create an embroidery design, so you can't create a completely new embroidery design. You can't combine designs. Now this is important for what we're doing today, because what we're going to do is we're going to use this bird, but we're then going to take it over to our sewing machine and then we're going to add some monogramming to it to make that gift, to personalize the gift. So we can't actually combine the designs on screen, but we can combine the designs on our sewing machine. So we're just going to work with the bird itself for now. You can't digitize fonts or lettering, and you also can't add lettering. So again, that's why we're going to add the lettering on the sewing machine. So let's have a look at what we can do. One of the things we can do is we can view the designs in different ways. So when we open the design, it comes in artistic view, and that's as if someone has shone a light onto your design and you can see the textures within the embroidery design. So if it's got a fill stitch, you'll be able to see how that fill stitch is going to look. You'll be able to tell if an area is a running stitch or if it's a satin stitch. You can really see how it's going to look when it's stitched out. We can now go up here and convert it to an artistic view. So this is a much more of a basic view. It flattens it all down and we can see exactly where all our lines and borders are. If we press show needle points, we can also see where each individual stitch is going to be. But for what I'm doing now, I'm going to keep it on artistic view. It's just easier to see how it's going to stitch out. So once we've looked at, got the design on the screen, then the next thing we can do is we can play around with, we can zoom in and out of it if we want to have a look at one particular area. So to zoom, we can either use the roller ball on our mouse, so that will allow it to zoom in and zoom out, or we can press F2 on the keyboard and that will make the design as big as it will go on screen, or we can use some of the zoom options up here, the zoom factors. So we can have to fit, which is the same as F2, or we can have it to hoop, so it will show the hoop that we've selected, or we can press zoom or B on the keyboard and just drag or drop a bounding line around it and that will zoom in for us. So there are zoom tools. The next thing we can do is we can rescale a design. So to rescale the design, we need to select this design, so we can click onto it. If we want to deselect, we just click to the side, but to select we click on and we see these bounding boxes, these little boxes around the edge. Now if I want to make my design bigger or smaller, I can click on my top right box and I can drag down to make it smaller and pull up to make it bigger. If I know exactly what size I want it to be, I can just enter the values in up here, or I can scale it up or down by a percentage using these boxes here. One other thing I can do is I can use these icons here, so I can scale up, and I can scale up by 20%, or I can scale down by 20%. So that's useful if you just want a quick step to make it bigger or smaller. Now I actually want to scale down by 20% to make my bird smaller so it will fit on my makeup brush holder. So I'm going to scale down by 20%. Another thing I can do if I wanted to was I could mirror my design. So we have a horizontal mirror and we also have a vertical mirror. Moving on, we can rotate 45 degrees to the left or 45 degrees to the right. Or if I know exactly how much I want to rotate by, I can enter the value in here. I can also skew my design if I want to. Another way of doing that is if I click on my design again, I get these see-through boxes, and if I click on top right again, that allows me to rotate, or if I click on the center one, I can skew my design. So it allows you to play around with those options on your design. Another useful tool is the Show Hoop tool and Hoop settings. So if I go into my Zoom toolbar, I can select to hoop. So at the moment we have a large oval hoop selected, but as I can see it's quite big. I don't need such a big hoop. So I can go in and select a smaller hoop. So I'm going to right click on Show Hoop and I'm going to select a smaller hoop. So I want to use the medium hoop and I'm going to use foot 26. So I'm going to choose Bernina medium hoop, foot 26 and click OK. So now it fits much better in the hoop. And again F2 to see the design full size. The next thing I'm going to look at is a really useful tool called Slow Redraw. Now I always like to watch my designs in Slow Redraw before I stitch them out, because it just shows me how it's going to work, how it's going to stitch out. Particularly if it's something I've designed, it allows me to work out whether I've got my colour order right or whether I need to do any editing. But even if it's a design that you've bought or you're using from the software, it still pays to just have a look at how it's going to stitch it out before you actually take it over to your machine. So we'll just quickly have a little look at that. And I press play and I can speed it up and it's going to show me how it's going to stitch out. It's showing all my underlay stitches and the correct colour order. It just gives me a better idea before I go to my machine what it's going to do. Now this design has some nice colour blending and that's what this is showing you just now. We can come out of that. Finally, what I want to do is print a template. Now a template is really useful when you're positioning your design on your project. So to create a template or a run sheet, we go to File and we can have a look at that on screen, Print Preview. Now what's great about this is it shows you the center point. It will print it out to scale. And if we zoom in, it shows you all the different thread colours you're going to use, and they're all, we've got some nice descriptions so you know exactly what you're stitching out. It shows you how much thread you need, it shows how many stitches are in the complete design, how many colour changes and the size. So it's really useful, and I always make sure I print one of these out before I start to sew. And I'm going to use this, as I say, I'm going to cut this out and place it on my template so I know exactly where I want my embroidery to go. So I can print that out. Finally, we need to send the design to our USB key. So when I'm ready to send my design, I click on Write to Card Machine, just on the little picture of the sewing machine. So I'm just going to press on that and it's going to bring up the various options. Now for most modern Bernina embroidery machines, they read EXP files, and that's what I need today. But you also have the choice of, if I was directly connected to my sewing machine, I could send it to my sewing machine and read the design off the computer. or I can save it onto the memory of my sewing machine. If I was using a deco machine, I've got that option there. If I'm using an older Bernina with say a USB to serial port converter, I would use this option. Or some Berninas, a couple of Berninas do actually read art files, like a 730 for example. Or if I was saving my design onto a USB key to send to someone else and they were going to edit it, then I could save it as an art design. But for this project today, I want to save it as an EXP file. That saves the design as 3 separate files that the computer reads. It takes out the information it needs from the art file and then sends it to your USB key. So I'm going to select that option, and that saved that onto my USB key. So now we're ready to go to our sewing machine. We're going to take the design over and we're going to add the monogramming using the options on the sewing machine. So I've printed out my design worksheet and I've cut out the embroidery from it, and this is exactly to scale. It shows me the centre point, and I've got some guidelines to make sure that I'm hooping up straight. So what I'm going to do is I've just laid this on my fabric, and I'm going to use a water-soluble marker, and I'm going to mark my centre point and some guideline points so I know I'm getting my design straight. And then I can just use a ruler and just draw those, just a rough guideline on my fabric. To help me when I'm hooping up. And this is my centre point here, make that a bit darker. Okay, so the next stage is to hoop up my fabric. We're going to hoop our fabric up, so I'm using 2 layers of stitch and tear as my stabiliser, just to keep the fabric nice and firm and tight and to stop any movement. So I've got my stitch and tear, and then I've got my fabric which I've marked, and I'm just going to place that over my stitch and tear. Then I've got my hoop, and I've got my hoop template inside my hoop, and I'm just going to place that so I know exactly where it needs to go. So this is just following the markings that I've taken from my template. Then I'm going to lift them all up and pop them in the hoop. So I'm just going to start at the top and push down, and then using my palms of my hands push my fabric and my hoop in, and then at this point I can make some adjustments because it's still in quite loosely. So I can just pull my fabric so I get it roughly in the right spot. So I'm just lining up using my markings. Then what I can do is then tighten up a little bit more. I really want this drum tight in the hoop. So once I'm happy with it, just tighten up a little bit more so it's nice and tight. One final little adjustment. Then I can pop my template out, and that's nice and tight. Might give it one last pull, because it does need to be as tight as it will go without distorting your fabric. And now we're ready to start embroidering. Okay, so I've put my design on my USB key, and now I'm going to plug it into my machine. And I'm going to press the picture of the USB key to find my bird. I've got 2 on here, but I'm going to use the number 2. So now I've got my bird selected. Now, because I want to really personalise this gift, I want to add some lettering to it. I want to add my friend's initials. So her name is Nicola, so we're going to add an N to this design. So I need to go up to my folders, and I want to add. From my sewing machine, from my fonts, and I'm going to use the font number 2, and I'm going to select an N and press the green tick. So now I've got my N on screen, I need to move it around because I want it to fit just underneath the bird to keep the design nice and neat. So you can see that my design now has 2 layers. So we have the bird, we have the monogram, or if we wanted to move the whole thing, we can group them together and move both elements, but I just want to move the N. So I'm going to select that, tap on it again, so I go into information, and I want to move my design. So this is this one here, so I'm going to press there, and using my length and width dials I can move it into place. So I'm going to move it down a little bit and along, down and along. So once I'm happy with the position, I might make that a tiny bit smaller, so I'm going to come back out of that, and this is to rescale, so I'm going to rescale and I'm just going to make it tiny bit smaller. I think I'll just take it down to 90%, so it's just a little bit smaller. If I wanted to, if I had more than one letter, I could play around with the spacing. So if you wanted to do 2 letters or 3 in your monogram, you could do, or if you wanted to rotate them, you can do. But for this, I just want my letter N, so I'm happy with how that's worked out. So I'm just going to come back and I can select the whole design and have a little look. Now, when I've brought up this design, it immediately puts it into the smallest hoop it will fit into. So it's gone into, it's saying a medium hoop, and that's the hoop that I've chosen to use, so that's great. I don't need to change anything. And I'm going to put foot 26 on, so I can just confirm that and come out of there. And now I'm ready to start embroidering. If I wanted to, I could go into my colours and I could change the colours if I wanted to. But for this project, I'm happy with the way it looks. And ultimately, it just depends on what colour you put on your machine. So I don't feel I need to change the colours on the screen. So I'm happy with my design, and I'm going to go to stitch out. Now, if you had a model that had easy embroidery, so the 580 has what's called expert embroidery, which means I can combine things. But if you have a model that has easy embroidery, you would just need to sew your bird out and then come back in and select your monogram and sew your monogram as a separate layer. And you could use your templates to help you do that. But because I've got the 580, I can combine them. So I'm happy with my design, and I'm going to press stitch out. So now I just need to thread my machine up and put my hoop on. So now we're threaded up and I've put my hoop on, and we're ready to go into the stitch out mode, which is just down here. So I'm going to press the picture of the needle, and it's jumped to the beginning of the first colour, which is the yellow in the design, but I'm opting for a green. We're using Metler Poly Sheen thread, so it's got a nice gloss to it, so we should have a nice attractive design. And we're ready to start stitching out. So it's saying, it's telling me how many stitches are going to be in this first colour, and we're ready to go. So I'm just going to lower my foot, I'm just going to hold on to my thread, and I'm just going to press and hold, and away we go. So it's done our first few stitches to allow us to trim our thread, so I'm just going to lift up and do that. And now we can carry on stitching. Okay, so now we're just going to change our thread colours, and we're going to move on to the darker green, and we're going to work our way through the design until we've stitched out the whole design. So I'm just putting my cotton reel holder on, making sure my presser foot's raised, and we're just going to rethread and carry on with the darker green. I'm just going to use my needle threader. really helps. Now lower my presser foot and I'm just going to start again. And now I can just trim my thread and let it carry on. Great, so now we've finished our embroidery and I think it's come out really nicely. I really like the colours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the hoop off and take the embroidery unit off and set up for some normal sewing, because we're now going to put our layers together and start making up our makeup brush holder. Okay, the next section is we're going to construct the inside of the makeup brush holder. So we're going to make the pockets which the brushes are going to fit into. So I've got a little brush set here, and I've created a template and I've worked out where each brush is going to go. So it might be worth you just laying your fabric out and placing your brushes down and just working out, you know, where they're all going to go and how deep the pockets need to be. So for the larger brushes, I'm going to create a little pleat at the bottom so the pocket's slightly bigger for the brush to fit in. It's also a good idea to do this at the beginning before you do your embroidery, because then if you pin it all together you can roll it up and then you can judge where you should put your embroidery. So because depending on how many brushes you've got and how thick they are, that can influence where the embroidery needs to go on the outside. So I've done all that and I've marked where my pockets are going to go. So I just need to pin everything together and then I can start sewing. So I've just got some normal wadding, and then I've got my inside fabric which I've marked out, and then I've got the pocket itself, which is I've just folded over my floral fabric. So I'm going to place that there so my markers all meet up, and then I'm going to pin that together. So now I've pinned everything together and I'm just going to sew my pockets in. I'm just going to use a normal straight stitch, and I've got a normal foot 1C on, and I'm going to start, I'm going to sew forwards and then quick reverse just to secure the ends, because you're going to be pushing brushes in and out, they do need to be quite secure. Now I've marked a guideline to follow, so I can just sew down, sewing all my layers together, and when I get to the end I'm going to reverse back and forwards and then stop. And this machine has wonderful scissors, so I can press my scissors and it will trim my threads for me. And then all I need to do is repeat the process, sewing in each line. I'm going to use the last line that I used as a guide to keep my rows straight, because I'm notorious for not sewing in a straight line. So I've got my other marker here, and I'm going to use the side of the foot as a guide, and I'm going to move my needle position right over, and then I can run the last line I've sewn up against the line on the foot. So I'm just going to sew the next section. So I'm going to go forwards, backwards, and just keep going until I get to the bottom. And again, use my scissors. I've just finished the next stage, which was to sew the channels in. So I've sewn all the different channels in for the different brushes. I've made some of them slightly wider because the brushes are quite wide, and then I'm going to have to create a little tuck at the bottom to just pin them into place. So these pins are just holding them in position. Then I've placed my ribbon, which I'm going to use to tie the whole the makeup brush roll together with, and I've placed that in the centre. The next stage is going to be to take my embroidered section, which I've cut down to size, and I'm just going to place that on top like this, and I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, leaving a gap to turn it through. So the next stage is going to be to pin it all down and to sew around the edge. I'm going to sew around the edge with a straight stitch, so off we go. I'm just going to go forwards and I'm going to secure my ends by just quick reverse, and then I'm just going to sew all the way around. I'm just going to set needle down so I can pivot when I get to my corner. So now I can stop with my needle down and I can use my knee lift, and it's nice and easy just to twist round, and then I can carry on sewing. Again, stop with my needle down, just use my knee lift to twist round, and away I go again. So I've sewn round the edge and I've left a little hole for us to turn it through. And I've trimmed down my edges, and I've trimmed extra close where I've got the wadding because we don't want too much bulk around the edge. So now all I need to do is turn it through, and I've got my handy Bernina pen, I'm not sure where I got this from, but to point my corners out, and then I'm going to press it and we'll see how it's looking. So I've turned it inside out and I've just pinned where I've left the gap, which allowed me to turn it inside out, and now I'm just going to top stitch all the way around the edge, so that'll close that gap up and give it a nice finish. So that's my next stage. I'm using the edge of the foot just to run along the side of the project, and I've moved my needle position as a guide, and I've got needle down set, and I'm going to use my knee lift again when I'm turning the corners. So I'm just going to do a stitch forward and a stitch back, and then we're just going to sew all the way around. I've also changed my thread, so I've got the decorative Metla poly sheen on top, which was this colour in the bird, and I've just got the normal sewing thread underneath. So we're just sewing all the layers together. Just to give it a bit of a finish around the edges. And then that will be the project finished. I'm just going to do one extra stitch. Just do one more stitch. That's it. These bits. I can use my scissors, and we'll just trim our threads. And that's the project finished. Now we just need to pop our brushes in. Now we can pop our brushes and this is just some eyeliner. Pop that in. So they should all fit into their little slots for your eyebrows. So this just keeps them all nicely together and clean and out of the way. So now we can slide them all in, and then we can just roll them up. So we're just going to roll the project up, and we want the embroidery so it sits nicely, and then we've got the ties to finish off in a nice bow. And there we go. That's a little personalised makeup brush roll.